Now, January is the time to get those dates in your diary for your 2024 holiday. And if you're considering a staycation, we're going to be looking at some of the new attractions, the new hotels that are coming on stream this year. Joining me for this, Eoghan Corry, owner and editor of Travel Extra. Eoghan, good morning.
Good morning, Pat.
Now, before we talk about all of that, let's talk about the Boeing 737 MAX 9 and the grounding of that particular aircraft by the Americans after a plug blew out of the aircraft fuselage.
Yes, a school teacher on his stroll this morning found the plug. It landed in a forest somewhere near Portland. Everybody came out of this without any casualties. It was an extraordinary act of navigation by the captain. The audio is being published online. You know, she just sent a very calm message back saying, we are having uncontrolled decompression. They were about half the height that you would reach in an aircraft, and there was discomfort for the passengers, but the oxygen masks lowered. And for the second time in a week, it has to be said, the cabin crew calmly, efficiently did what they were trained to do, and the passengers didn't panic, and it all ended well for everybody except Boeing, who are now facing a lot of new questions about the 737 MAX.
Okay, now, I suppose the benefit of all of this was that it only happened at 16,000 feet, 10 minutes into the flight, so they hadn't reached cruising altitude, which meant that everyone was belted in, which meant that no one was likely to be sucked out the window by the pressure differential, low pressure outside, high pressure, or as we would have it, normal sea level pressure inside. And the cabin crew were still strapped in because they hadn't started their service. No one was going to the toilets. So everyone was secure at the moment that the plug blew out.
A lot of things went right. One of the questions being asked now is some of the signals about decompression in the aircraft that was appearing in the cockpit the day before. But the big question is how safe our aircraft, and listeners may be familiar, it's been very well explained over the weekend that this was not an emergency exit. It's a place for an emergency exit if you were putting a higher density of passengers, and it was serving as a window. But it blew out, the question, it was for an aircraft that's only 2 months old. All the suspicion is that this goes back to the manufacturing, the plant
Now,
when it was put in place.
When you look at the pictures of the aircraft any of them that didn't blow out, you would see this door, and it looks like a door from the outside. But if you're a passenger, you don't see a door because it's not intended for use as a door, but it could be if they put a door in. Instead, they put in this plug.
Now, you're absolutely touching on all the questions that Boeing had to face when they initially faced two tragic accidents that involved the MAX. How did they just take an existing design and sort of shoehorned another variety of 737 onto it, rather than putting in a new patent for a new aircraft, which would have slowed down the design process? They were under pressure in the competition with Airbus, and they've spent the last 3 years reassuring us this was not the case. Their argument has a few holes in it, not as many holes as the 737, the Alaska Airways flight had, but they are now scrambling to reassure the aviation industry again. There are only 6 airlines that operate this. Most of them are operated by 2 American airlines, United and Alaska. All have been grounded. No European airline operates this 737-9. Ryanair, big operator of the Boeing MAX, the 737-8200, but very deftly, while they ordered a lot of 737-8200s, and they put in a huge order for the 737-10 earlier this year, but last year, the spring of 2023, they don't have any 737-9s. They don't have any on order. So from Ireland's point of view, and from where our listeners are sitting this morning, we really won't be coming across this type of aircraft unless you're flying internally within the United States.
Okay, but presumably if any of the aircraft flying in or out of Irish airspace have this plug device, they'll have to be checked.
Yeah, the European EASA has said that they're following the American regulators on this. The UK has said the same, and there are no European operators that have this door, this plug. But it does, the 737, it does raise the questions, and I'm sure inquiries will be made from Swords this morning in the direction of Seattle, because the 737 MAX 10 also has a higher number of passengers. It was one of the factors mentioned by Ryanair when they put the order in, and it does. Even in that case, if they are taking the larger, they will not be using a door as a window. The door will be there as an extra emergency exit door to meet the safety regulations. Obviously, as your number of passengers go up, the number of emergency exits has to go up as well.
All right. And according to the New York Times, Alaska Airlines had restricted the use of the plane, to which the accident happened, because of that warning light that went off on previous flights. And, pilots they see an intermittent warning and they wonder, they report it, but nothing was done. But presumably they tried to find a fault, and intermittent faults are the hardest things to find. Anyway, let's park that for the moment and talk about home holidays and some of the new things on the market this year.
Right, we've a very exciting year. We've got we've got 9 or 10 hotels. Most of them are at the top end. We've got a couple of nice little luxury hotels opening up. 1 or 2 opened up before Christmas. We're on the visitor centre side. We're going to see not so much. Our last big ticket visitor experience that we opened in Ireland was opened about 18 months ago. It's the Avondale Beyond the Trees experience. I recommend it very, very highly. In the south of Wicklow, we will see a little bit of the Rock of Cashel is due to get a revamp. Brunabonia got a revamp during COVID. If anybody hasn't been there, we're also going to see Westport Estate get a new adventure park that's probably going to open this year. And then the visitor attractions, the Book of Kells has just got a complete reimagining. Is that the phrase they use for it? The Record Tower in Dublin Castle is going to get one. Interesting things happening in New Ross as well. The Norman Trail with a new Norman Visitor Interpretation Centre. And we've got possibly 1 or 2 others that mightn't open before the end of the year. But on the visitor attraction side, nothing massive like the Beyond the Trees, but enough going on. And then obviously from the accommodation point of view, before I come to accommodation, we have 6 greenways in the country that have been well publicised. Starting with Mayo and I haven't done all of them, but I had the great pleasure of doing the Limerick one earlier in the summer of last year, and the New Ross Southeast Greenway will be joining them. That'll be our 7th Greenway, small section but already open. So lots of those openings taking place. Yeah. But the big question then is accommodation.
Yeah, I was going to bring that to you, Eoghan, because there are some budget hotels opening up, but many of them you're saying are high end with higher prices. Lots of families would have gone to the lower end, the kind of 2-3 star hotel. Holiday accommodation tend to be maybe near the coast and so on. And all of that, or much of it, is taken up with accommodation for refugees and asylum seekers, which means that the only hotels that might be on offer will be out of the budget range of many families.
And there is another problem that the new ones are concentrated in the cities, which is, if you go back pre-pandemic, that's where the accommodation crunch was. Anytime there was a big event, and I think a record price for Ireland was reached when the Notre Dame Navy match took place last August, when the average hotel price went past €300 for the night. But what we've seen is some of the Travelodges and the Nick's Hotel that opened a few weeks before Christmas, all of them being delivered into the city centres, while we have this extraordinary thing happening that some of the hotels that were built specifically to cater for tourists along the Atlantic Way, the Wild Atlantic Way, for instance, the Wild Atlantic Lodge even in Ballyvohana, that is taken up in a government contract. It's partly the number taken up by government contract, but it's also the location of those rooms. And as you go north of that line from Dublin to Galway along the west coast, the proportion gets higher. And we have another big problem which has barely been mentioned, Pat, and that's on the self-catering side. Obviously, the housing ministry is under serious pressure to try and deliver more rooms for Irish people seeking rental, as well as the general accommodation. And one of the decisions they've made is to target short-term rentals. And we have a new register being introduced, which has in danger of taking out a lot of the short-term rental accommodation that's already in the market. We have about 6,000 registered portfolio type self-catering cottages. People will be familiar well up and down the length and breadth of the country. I mean, we don't exactly know how many Airbnb we have, but there could be about 30,000 of that. The Scottish experience, and they've just been through a similar process with similar political decisions being made, is that 85% of that stock was taken off the market. Should that happen, and we run into the rugby matches, the UEFA final next year, all the concerts that are planned, we have first of all this lean on our hotel stock, and then the short-term rental stock being affected as well. Yeah. We are going to run into accommodation problems. That leads to headlines like the prices going through the roof.
Sure. It's an interesting dilemma, because if you take people out of the Airbnb business, which is all short-term, a day or two at a time, and there's a certain amount of maintenance, changing the linen and all the rest of it. But by and large, you don't have long-term tenants, and therefore you don't have long-term wear and tear and damage and all the rest of it, and you don't have to have any dealings, any truck with the PRTB or the RTB as it is. Now, a lot of people might just say, to hell with it. We're not going back into the long-term rental system. We'll sell up. Now, the government might say, well, that's grand, because then we'll be liberating homes for those who can afford to buy them.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because there is already restrictions on what are called rent pressure zones, which most people would think would fall in the major cities. But some of the definition of a rent pressure zone, taking a 10k outside a town, would take a lot of the short-term rental stock around the town of Killarney, which is our tourism capital for all intents and purposes, out of the market. I've talked to a lot of these people who have a house and they rent it out to tourists, and they're saying once you start going through the planning permission process, having to apply for planning permission, maybe put aside 3,000 or 4,000 out of their annual budget for the bureaucracy, they are going to exit the market. We don't really, it's uncertain area, because first of all, the data doesn't seem to be as finely honed as it should be for making a major political decision as this. And as I said, when you look for precedents around Europe, what the Irish politicians are doing is not that different from what politicians everywhere are doing. They're sort of saying, okay, take Airbnb. Airbnb is the shorthand because there are other players, Verbo being a big player, but also the traditional short-term rentals. But they all say, well, if we take this out, we'll be able to deliver this. It's politically expedient. But as I say, the Scottish example is that you ended up with 15% of your short-term rentals after they went through the process.
So beware of that law of unintended consequences. Eoghan, thank you very much for joining us. Eoghan Corry, owner and editor of Travel Extra.